We'll just chat.
You chat me to stop it, okay?
Okay.
All right. So goodbye.
Are you tweeting?
Oh yeah, I should tweet too. And
then there was just 2.
Yes. Let me see if there's
no tweets yet. And of course, we can't see how many people are watching either. So
I presume thousands. Oh, there it is. I see the tweet.
32, he says. So I could at least look at the visitors to live ASP.NET, I guess, in close to real time using analytical power of application insights through Microsoft Azure. So I click on this here. Thank you. I am considering a career change into marketing and executive keynotes. So if I go to which one of these is what I want, which one of these things will tell me how many people are here right now? Users? Let's click on users.
Wait, no, I just went to the thing. 33 watching now.
Scott is kindly reminding us that we are live. Yes, we know. It's all right.
Yes.
I haven't said anything bad yet.
Yeah.
All right, so this says that the last count is at 45 unique users at the last little blip. This is a new graph. I haven't seen this one before. I'm just going to keep talking to something that no one can see. If I went to sessions, no, users is good enough. The vast majority of them are using Chrome, 60, and then the next one is Edge, and then there are some Firefox stragglers. There are 10 people on their Android phones using Chrome Mobile. Yep. And then 8 people on their iPhones using Mobile Safari. This is in like the overall, this last 24 hours, the last 12 hours.
Does it show also geographical? Can you bring up?
It's probably.
No, it's just interesting because we have people saying hello from Lagos, Nigeria.
I know it does. It's just that I literally have no earth. Oh, here we go. It's right in front of me. Country or region top 5. So 67. This is okay. So this is time range on this currently is set to goes back to like 10. It's literally 12 hours. I'm looking at the last 12 hours. If I drop this down to the last hour, here we go. 24 in the US, 3 in India, 3 in the UK, 2 in Germany, and 2 in Norway. So this is the time slot designed for for Europe, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? What time is it in the UK right now? It's like 8 hours ahead. So yeah, it's like 6
p.m. Yeah.
So this is the time slot we use designed for the people, those in Europe. I mean, if you're further into Europe, it's 8 at night. So there's only so much we can do. Like we're not willing to get up at 5 in the morning and do this live, unfortunately, because we're just like that. So this is saying there's 47 unique users, but I imagine there's some delay. And it says 60 now. So I'm guessing Hanselman, if he was able to join us, his view of Hangouts would tell us that there's actually quite a lot more than that. Usually we get up to like 150. So
cool.
All right, let me bring up the right window again so I know what on earth I'm talking about. Click on this. Okay, so outside here it's kind of apocalyptic today. There's bushfires, or what do you call them here? Wildfires. Bushfires for my Australian colleagues. Wildfires in Cle Elum, which is like an hour and a bit from my house.
Wow.
Over the pass, over the Snoqualmie Pass, or over the ski fields, and then on the other side is Cle Elum. I went there for a holiday earlier this year. There's like fires everywhere, and there's fires in Oregon. It's like 74 like large wildfires in the US right now, and as a result, and a lot of them are on the West Coast. It's just like the apocalypse here today. Like it's smoke. It's going to be 36 degrees centigrade here today, which is what, like 98 degrees Fahrenheit, which is insanely hot for Seattle, especially this time of year. And the sky is just orange. Like it's crazy. Like you can't see more than a few hundred yards because of the smoke, and it's it's crazy. The sun is like insanely orange. Like it's got really smoky, hazy. Anyway, it's weird. We missed all this. Apparently, it happened while we were in Australia this year. Here while we were over there, but this is what it was like growing up in Australia in summer. Like you'd just get a bushfire every year somewhere nearby, and you'd get these smoky, hazy days. So,
wow,
there you go. So it feels a little weird. It's a little, everything is just yellow. Like all the natural light is just yellow today.
There's a big fire up in Los Angeles, but that's a couple hours
really?
from here. Yeah, they said it's the biggest by acreage, biggest recorded one in history.
Wow, by acreage?
By acreage, I mean,
it's in the middle of nowhere, I hope, though.
Yeah, Los Angeles is weird. It's a huge spread out metropolitan area, and there's a lot of canyons and things in between different, so there'll be like tons of homes, and then there'll be a canyon, and then there are more tons of homes and stuff. So this is contained, I guess, so far. But
I just realized.
Yes.
I'm totally listening to what you were saying. That was great.
Yes.
Giving me an update on the.
So then they won the World Series, and I was like,
"Oh, good on them, gay sports." That the YouTube, obviously, if you're just looking on YouTube, it tells you how many people are watching.
Yes, that's what I was looking at earlier.
Yes, you've got 124. All right, so welcome everybody. Scott has graciously set up the stream for us this morning, but he has been called away on a very important secret meeting. Yes. So I'm moving stuff on my desk and my microphone's going to be popping at everyone. So it is just John and I this morning, but that's all you really wanted to see anyway, isn't it? So that's fine. It's okay. The great bearded ones. I'm still growing my beard in. So I had to make a choice this weekend. I chose to trim underneath again, but I am just going to let this go. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It's not. I don't have the best beard growing ability naturally, unfortunately. It goes really well here. And the mustache isn't bad, but everything else here is just a little straggly.
I'm the same. Yeah, it's really patchy on the cheeks, but we're getting a head start on Movember, I think.
That's right, absolutely. So. And you've got more wisdom in your beard than mine. I got a little bit of wisdom coming through now.
Right, so I got plenty of pride.
Wear it with pride. Yeah. Very, very good. All right, so what's going on at the moment?
Well, do you want me to start with the community links?
Yeah, so let's throw over to John Loves Community.
All right, let's see if we can do that.
Now, I can't lock on you, so I'm just going to mute myself so that I don't accidentally take the screen away from you as I talk.
Excellent. Okay. Great. Okay, so here's a really cool one. So this is the Humanitarian Tool Box. Steve Gordon went and updated from ASP.NET Core 1.0 to 2.0 and blog the entire experience. So this is a really good kind of, it's not a trivial application. There's a lot going on. And so he explained, step by step what he did, how he upgraded the project. He shows the difference between, how simplified the project file became going from that to that. So, and again, this is even, once complete, there's still a good amount in here. So this is, again, one I'd recommend reading. Goes through things like identity authentication, testing, all kinds of stuff. So that's great. Here's one. I don't know if you'll want to unmute on any. David Fowler.
It's happening finally. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. So he tweeted that the ASP.NET Core symbols are now on the symbol servers, and the source is linked to GitHub. So the source linking will directly work, right? So you can debug down into. We're using source linking.
Yeah, so like for people who don't know how this works, Microsoft has these things called symbol servers, which is a standard that's been around for dog years, like forever. And VS supports downloading symbols, as in PDB files, basically, for things that you're using, including the .NET Framework and ASP.NET Core and anyone else who from Microsoft who publishes their symbols onto the Microsoft Symbol Server, dynamically while you're debugging in Visual Studio, assuming you enable the features in VS to do that. So to do that, you have to turn off the Just My Code feature, which is the default in the Visual Studio debugger. So if you go into your debugger settings and look for Just My Code and turn that off, then VS will kind of light up the features that let you try to debug things that aren't your code, all right? Things that you've pulled in, DLLs from elsewhere or packages. And then it's all a case of, well, if I only have a DLL, how do I get all the other bits of information I need to do productive debugging? Well, you need to get symbol files, and there's lots of different types of symbol files. They may or may not contain source code or mappings to source code. Obviously, you don't have the source code locally. So traditionally, this has been difficult, but there are some new features that have happened in the last, basically this version of Visual Studio, namely support for something called source link. And source link allows you to embed a manifest inside the PDB file or inside the symbol that says for a given method name, and location in that method that's currently being executed, like what source file was this contained in, and furthermore, where can I get that source file? Like you can literally put a URL in that says, debugger, when you need to try and show the source for this place in this file, in this assembly, you can download this file from this GitHub URL, which is what we've done. And so for ASP.NET Core right now, it's not for the .NET Core bits, but for the ASP.NET Core bits on top. So that's Microsoft.extensions.star, Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.star, and I believe Microsoft.EntityFramework Core.star. If you turn off just my code and you enable the Microsoft symbol servers, which are 2 things you need to do to have this work, then you put a breakpoint inside your Razor page or your controller. And then when you hit that breakpoint, you go down the call stack. So like, you'll find what you'll find is the call stack, the frames underneath your code now that are our code won't be gray anymore. They'll be black, which means that you can actually go in them and use them, or depending if you're using a different theme, there might be a different color. And then if you double click on one of those frames, obviously the editor will try and navigate you to the line of code that represents that frame. VS will download the symbols from the symbol server, and it will download the source files from GitHub because of the information inside the symbols that were on the symbol server. So there's a whole bunch of steps, unfortunately, which is great. And so now you can kind of step through debug ASP.NET Core itself, which is really nice if you're trying to understand how it works, or if you're trying to replicate a bug or things like that. This support is only present in VS 2017 15.3 right now. So as long as you're running the latest version of VS 2017, including the free version, the community edition, then you can do this. We are trying to work with the OmniSharp team, or we will work with the OmniSharp team and the VS Code folks in order to try and get some of this support into there as well. And obviously as well into VS for Mac, because this is a really, really useful feature. I've lost John. There he is.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to watch the chat, and in order to do that, I keep having to mute it, and then I hear you talking earlier, and I have the radio delay. Awesome. On to the next one. I'm actually going to thematically move this ahead. Also, the Docs team moved the .NET API browser. They've added the API to the. I'm not saying this right. The .NET ASP.NET Core 2.0 and 1.0 and 1.1, I believe, also are in here in the API browser.
That all landed last week as well.
So cool. Let me see other announcements-y kind of stuff to be aware of. I saw this issue here. So pre-release .NET Core 2.0 runtimes are going to be deprecated. So that means if you're running on a preview of the 2.0 bits, let me see. This is saying for early October 2017. So I'm mentioning this here because we've got some early adopters who watch the show, so make sure to get on the RTM bits. This is a nice post from Hisham. He went through and summarized some of the Razor page conventions. So these are conventions that are kind of turned on by default in the page convention class. And so he kind of pointed out here's like the allow anonymous to page into folder, authorize page, authorize folder, and add page route. And I believe that's it. So.
Yeah, so when he says conventions, not to be confused with, it's not just like the convention out of the box. There's actually a programming sort of API. There's a paradigm called conventions in the Razor Pages options, which is where you change all of the conventions, which is part of this application model thing that we have in ASP.NET Core MVC. So yeah, this is page convention collection. I mean, you could argue that these are configurations, but the point is you set them up and then like it all kind of works by convention after that, and there's some default ones in the box. And so you go through the Razor Pages conventions API, and then from there, and you can write your own conventions, like you can literally change the ones that are in the box, which is kind of the entire model. You set up your conventions in one place, and then everything kind of flows out of that. So yeah, he's documented essentially here, or overviewed the ones that we have in the box around. What were they? There's the ones to do with authentication and authorization, I should say.
Yep.
That's pretty much them, isn't it? That's it. Yeah. Oh, and then routing, adding a page route.
Yep. Cool. All right. Here's a neat one. I saw Mark Rendell just publish. This is Embedder, and this is, he says here, it's a hacky.NET resource embedding while we wait for official support in core. So the idea here is that you can set up configuration and it embeds things into your assembly. So kind of neat.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I'd be interested to know what this does over and above just standard resource embedding.
Yeah. So honestly, I didn't dig in much more past that. So
I mean, he has a link there that doesn't work properly in .NET Core, so I guess I'd have to follow that to understand what they're saying is the issue here. Oh, okay. So if you use Resource Manager, so it's not okay. So embedding it into the assembly seems to work fine, but the Resource Manager gets string API when you run on Linux. Specifically, doesn't return an embedded text file. Okay, on Windows it works. in Linux, it just shows series project on the text file using. Oh, does it show the path? So it's showing the path instead of extracting out the. Okay, if you scroll down, does it say there's a? Okay, MS Build does not currently support non-string. Oh, yeah, right. So we kind of knew. It's not check. Yep. Yep. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I did know that there were issues, or there was a lack of support for non-string resources in .NET Core. So like, traditionally you can embed binaries and bitmaps and icons and stuff, but that stuff isn't supported in .NET Core.
Yeah, he's got examples of font files and things.
Right, obviously there used to be an ability to embed a text file. So you can embed a file as a text file, then the standard getString API would detect that you were saying, please get me the string that's contained in this embedded file. And that works on Windows, I'm assuming because of the full MS build, I'm not really sure, but doesn't work on Linux. So, all right.
Cool. Jack Histon's got a series here going on. He's digging through the ASP.NET Core source code and just kind of documenting what he's finding. So here he's looking specifically, he's already looked at model binding and value providers, and this is kind of a deep dive into action discovery. So this is, the standard MVC controller action discovery and describing how that works. This is significantly more complex. Every time I've read posts where people have done this in the past, previous versions of MVC, there's a lot more going on than you'd expect.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the MVC framework doesn't really care about controllers at runtime. When it's executing stuff, all it cares about is where's the action, where's the handler. And it's all done through these things called action descriptors. But you have to find actions and describe them using action descriptors, and that's where we look for those as methods on controllers. We also describe Razor pages using action descriptors because it's all the same pipeline. And so I think he talks about that. Yeah. So then it's all pluggable. You can change where you want these things to be found from. So if you want to find pages somewhere else, or you want to find your controller actions somewhere else, you can completely customize that.
Cool. All right. Here's one from Andrew Locke. Here he's writing about creating a rolling file logging provider. So the idea with a rolling file is that, older things it's a long text file, and the older things move off the log as newer things are added. So he's partly doing this to show off the ASP.NET Core logging infrastructure, and he shows kind of step by step all the way through. Here's how he goes ahead and implements it, and then goes through. Skip down to the end here. He also includes, so he's got like a batching logger, and then he also includes extension methods. So adding onto the iLogging builder some extension methods to make it easy to add that in.
That's cool. Yeah. Obviously, you could just plug in something like Serolog that supports all this type of stuff already. But if it's a good exercise to understand the infrastructure of the logging system and the abstractions in ASP.NET Core, and if you didn't want all the Serolog for some reason, you did want to roll your own, then this would be great.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Last thing here is the Msdn this month has tons of stuff in here on .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. So specific, there's ASP.NET Core. There's one on cookies, claims, authentication from Dino Esposito, and there's EF. There's also the getting started. So tons of stuff here.
I think there's a Razor Pages article too. So there's at least ASP.NET
Yep, there you go. Steve Smith.
Yep. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here as a result of .NET Core and .NET Standard 2 coming out, and ASP.NET Core. There's another one there, Snapshot Production for production apps and services. Yeah, so that's definitely worthwhile checking out that, and you can just read it online. You don't need to subscribe or anything like that. So even though Msdn isn't where we host our docs anymore, the concept of the Msdn obviously still exists in some form, and the magazine is still hosted there, and we're still writing articles for it, and as is the community. So definitely check that out.
That is it.
Everyone says you need to get a better microphone because apparently I sound amazing and you all sound like crap. So
I wonder. Wow, interesting.
No, they're just saying that compared to the Yeti Blue,
okay,
the podcasting mic, they appreciate.
Funny story. I used to have I do have. I have a really nice microphone. Yeah. But I ended up on podcasts. I was the one that sounded really, the deep booming voice, and or as much as I can pull that off. And everyone else had not the same quality mic. And so I switched to using this because I was like fitting in. I'll bring out my fancy mic. We'll try and shut down Hanselman next time.
Fair enough. I've just asked everyone if they want to ask questions to ask them now in the chat and tag it with #question at the beginning. That would make it easy. Quick update on what's going on. I think we hope to get the Signaler Alpha out this week. Well, that's interesting. There's someone here. There's someone here in the chat who I don't recognize the name of who has a little spanner next to their name, which would indicate that they're a admin, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So I know Scott had made some people admins.
Oh, really?
Oh, Jenny. Yeah.
Never made me an admin. Or
Oh,
you.
That's funny.
Isn't that fantastic? So yeah, so we hope to get the Signaler Alpha out this week. I think the team's testing that right now. They branched last week. There are packages up on MyGet, a couple of changes they want to get in, I believe. So that'll hopefully go out later this week. Like I said, it's already Tuesday because we had a long weekend. So we'll see how that goes. I also hope to get the roadmap updated this week in public. And that should hopefully, and then along with that would be a high-level planning announcement for the initial 2.1 preview, which I've sort of alluded to. I've been saying that we started the 2.1 planning process. We're kind of going through the internal part of that right now, which is where the bosses who are much higher than me decide sort of what they want the next wave of releases to be aligned with and what the sort of big marketing, sort of competitive features are that we need to focus on. And then we turn that into like actual work to do. And then that will be logged publicly on GitHub in the next week or so. And then that's where obviously we invite the community to then come along and get involved in how we actually implement those features. And so, like I said, I hope to get the planning announcement done like I did for the last, for the 2.0 milestone. We had these sort of high level planning announcements that just gave you an overview of, for a given milestone, what are the very high level big rocks, as I like to call them, that we're working on. Yeah, I look tired. Yeah, I didn't sleep well last night. It's funny. I had to get up early this morning to come here for 10 a.m. because getting up and getting ready by 10 a.m. is actually a big deal for me. And my kids start school tomorrow, so that's, the whole summer holidays is like just coming to an end. It's just one of those things. Unfortunately, my brain just didn't let me sleep last night. But I am fine, rest assured. So yeah, I'll get that out, and then we can all start partying on for those who'd like to get involved on the 2.1 side of things. Other than that, we're busy trying to help people get onto 2.0. Documentation continues to get written. Obviously, we have a bit there already, but there's still a lot of work to do to get our docs updated for 2.0. I'm loving seeing all these blog posts from the community. People are really starting to give us good, give good in-depth and good sort of overviews on various aspects of 2.0. There's more conferences coming up, obviously, for the last sort of third of the year, and so there'll be a lot more content on 2.0 coming. I'm waiting for some videos to be released of some stuff that we've already done. And John, I was thinking this morning in the shower, actually, had a shower thought regarding our workshop, that there's some stuff in that workshop content that we probably should update for 2.0 RTM, because we made some concessions when we built it based on missing features that we then ultimately added back, or completed adding in the RTM, namely around page filters in Razor Pages. So we have that part of the workshop where we write a filter to enforce new users signed up with the extra information, like giving us their full name and stuff like that. And we had to do some sort of weird stuff around what paths to exclude that filter from running on. The correct way to do that is to have a marker attribute on those ones that you want to ignore it for, and then look for that in the metadata for the current route from the filter. And we could do that now, so we should at some point go back and do that before we teach that again, which I think would be good.
Okay, yeah. I'll work with you on that.
The other thing I'd really like to hope to get time to do this week is to update the live ASP.NET website to 2.0. Because I mean, I've done a bunch of videos where I went through on the previews and did it, but I haven't actually published it, and I haven't updated it to RTM. So I really want to find a 2-hour block where I can come in here and just do that, and I'll do some live streaming and coding and working through all the problems like I usually do to get that up and running. So hopefully I'll find some time this week, but I'm, hopefully is not a strategy. It's just a hope. We'll see what happens. I'll have to look at my calendar. But if that doesn't happen this week, hopefully I can get to it next week. What else is going on? Once I get the roadmap and the planning doc out, we'll spend a stand-up talking about the big stuff that we're currently planning for 2.1. Some people might have noticed some stuff. If you're following the repos closely, we have actually started work on some things already, because obviously we have engineers and people who are ready to do work. And so there is some work started already. Like we had Caesar on talking about HTTP2. That's going to be part of 2.1. There is some MVC and routing investigations that are going on right now. We're continuing work on the Razor tooling improvements that we started in 2.0 to really try and sort of take the Razor tooling experience in Visual Studio and VS for Mac and eventually a VS Code a lot further down the track. Like it's going to be stagnant for a while. We don't really have, we don't have things like refactoring. We didn't have even basic things like IntelliSense for directives. So at page and at model and at functions and at section, we don't have statement completion for those things. We do now. I've seen it on the developer's box. So that'll be in the next release. And the other thing is that in 15.4 of Visual Studio 2017, which I think is in preview 1 right now, if you're on the public preview, I believe .NET Core 2 will be included in the box. And so for 15.3, .NET Core 2 was a separate install that you downloaded from the .NET website. In 15.4, it'll be included in the box. And so usually at that point, we expect an uptick of adoption because it's easier to find. It's right there. And at the same time, I think there will be a servicing release for .NET Core around that time as well to fix whatever bugs people have reported that meet the quality bar and severity bar for their first servicing release. So yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff going on. Cool. We have a bunch of questions in here now. Do you want to scroll through and be Mr. Question Asker?
Sure. Yeah, well, so there's one about batch support, middleware batch support.
Yeah, and I think someone pointed to an issue. They found the issue where it's linked. So I'm assuming that's similar to, I think Web API had this feature, and it's like the ability to handle on the server side request batching, I think. So I think the idea of the middleware is somehow it
batches multiple requests.
Is it actually like a standard? Like you send multiple requests in a single request delineated somehow? Or does it literally like stall the pipe and wait for, I mean, that wouldn't work with the way
there's there's HTTP batch support, right?
Okay. That must be a thing. There must be like a way to bundle multiple requests into a single actual request and then have the server treat them as if they're multiples. So
yeah, it's man, I'll remember it in a while because I remember writing something about it. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So I think
batching multiple responses into one, like from one request, get multiple responses.
Yeah. So it's not true pipelining. It's more. I'm going to send you one actual HTTP request from the purpose of the HTTP spec, but within the body of that, I'm going to represent multiple API calls, formatted as HTTP, so that when you return to me, I want you to give me. Similarly, I want you to give me multiple responses. I believe that's what it is. So I think it's designed for clients, HTTP clients that have that support baked in as well. So you can just say, can you please batch up these next 4 calls and send them as one outgoing HTTP request and process them as one response, but come them back as 3 or 4.
Okay. Jack is asking, will SignalR Alpha support backplane for SQL Server?
Not SQL. I think the first one we're going to support will be Redis. I think that's all we're going to support in the alpha.
Okay.
And then you'd be able to write your own one if you wanted to.
All right. Filtering out a Visual Studio class diagram question. That's
not
really
for us.
And so this one's kind of interesting. Will SQL Server Report Viewer ever be released for ASP.NET Core? I mean, I don't know if you ever work with that much, Damien. I mean
so that question has come up repeatedly ever since MVC came out in 2009. That report viewer isn't owned by us. It's owned by the SQL team, or it was, 9 years ago. Honestly, I don't know who owns it anymore. I don't think, right now, I don't know of any plans. I would be very surprised if we were to see in the next year or so some type of drop-in component like the old report viewer for web forms, because it was just simply a different way of doing things.
It would have to be a huge rewrite. I spent some time going through that with Reflector way back in the day, trying to make some things work, and it is very much all custom controls and all this.
Of course it is, yeah. And I think there was even an ActiveX component back in the day as well. Honestly, I think people would probably that team. I'm guessing. I'm making a total guess here. Is probably more concerned with things like Power BI and using that as a strategy for doing this type of thing. But because Power BI has embedding support and things like that, and there has a designer app that you can download. It's kind of the analogy. It's kind of the analog to what we used to have back in the SQL Server report designer and report viewer kind of days. with the report services running the server. So yeah, no plans that I'm aware of, and my team isn't anywhere near owning that. So I don't know of anything. Sorry.
Yep. Another question about MongoDB support for EF Core.
That's a question for the EF team.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you want me to mention questions like this that don't, that?
I mean, sometimes I know the answer.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How high is edit and continue support on the to-do list?
I don't know. I don't think it's that high. If you go to, we used to log these issues on the tooling repo. I think we still, yeah, okay. So they do have it. Let's see if edit and continue is listed there. Edit and continue. Edit and continue not working. And that was opened in 2015, nearly 2 years ago, October 2015. So it doesn't look particularly high on the list. But that would be a question for Syed and the tooling team. It all just comes down to what the data is telling us about people who it's all standard sort of triaging stuff, right? How we prioritize these things. I'm not aware of it and continue making it into the cut for the next release.
Okay.
It'd be interesting to know how many people, like we have telemetry about who uses it from previous releases. I don't think it's incredibly high, which is obviously why it hasn't been prioritized yet. There's always, doesn't mean no one uses it. Obviously people do because they ask us, but the reality is when you have as many users as we do, having a couple of people ask you about something over and over doesn't mean there's a lot of people using it.
I end up using .NET Watch Run and VS Code kind of when I want to do that more interactive.
Well, it's interesting because VS does that already. This is different. Edit continue is specifically around debugging.
Right. Okay.
And so if you're not actually got the debugger attached, it just works fine. Like every time you make a code change and save, VS recompiles the project for you. You don't have to do anything. There's a bit of a delay while it recompiles, obviously, but it works just fine. It's only when you're debugging that edit continue comes into play, and then it can actually do the IL sort of re-injection into the process. And I don't know whether the limitation is in tooling or in the debugger or in the .NET Core runtime right now. I honestly don't know. But yeah, that's what it gives you.
Cool. Okay. Question here about commodity hosting providers that support ASP.NET Core through something like Fusion Passenger. I took a quick Google at Fusion Passenger. Honestly, I mean, an obvious commodity hosting provider is App Service, right? But
I don't even know what the Fusion thing is they're referring to. I'm sorry.
It's a kind of a combined. From looking at it, it's a thing that combines like Nginx and Node and other. It makes it kind of easy to kind of tick things off.
Okay.
So I mean, it'd be not if a follow-up question, I guess, would make sense. A question asking how to submit a link for me to share in the community part. So you can email me, john.galloway@microsoft.com. You can send to me on Twitter. It's @JohnGalloway. Those are kind of the two easiest ways. And then also if you do tweet it, use the hashtag ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET. ASP.NET Core especially stands out. So let me see.
It's one from Lewis here.
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, can we ever expect the instant compile feature that was briefly present when it was still Project JSON, etc.? So I think what Lewis is referring to was back when we had DNX. So before we moved to .NET Core and separate hosts and all that type of stuff, the .NET XE. DNX had this feature where we had a symmetry between runtime compilation and design time compilation. And we basically hosted the compiler inside the DNX host. And so we didn't have a separation between tools and runtime. DNX.exe did everything, which was good in some ways, but caused a lot of problems in other ways, which is why we ended up going back to where we are. I think you won't see it architected in the same way. Whether you'll see a feature like that for the purposes of development come back, I think the answer is probably yes, simply because we want to get the performance characteristics of doing active development on a project back to what we had when we had DNX doing that. We did some pretty crazy tricks behind the scenes to avoid things getting loaded again when you changed your code, so that you could change a controller file and it would be recompiled instantly and available in your application. Just like today, if you change a Razor file while you're developing, after you've launched the application, you'll note that that Razor change is picked up basically instantaneously. And as soon as you change the file, you can F5 in the browser, and there's practically no discernible wait, because all the upfront cost of getting the compiler bootstrapped and ready to compile the code has already happened. And so then all you have to do when a Razor file changes is parse the Razor file and compile it. It's like simply one file. And that's very, very quick. We want to get to that same level for C#. That was something that we did with DNX, because we kind of built this whole thing around the development experience. But going back to the MS build based sort of out of proc build system that we have now, which is what the rest of .NET uses, which gives us a lot of interoperability, it means that we've regressed that scenario slightly. But it is something that we're very keen on doing. It's actually one of our big rocks for 2.1, as handed down from above, is that we really want to get our what we call our inner loop performance back. Inner loop is basically stuff that we characterize as developers do at least 10 times a day. So you can probably figure out, well, I code and I build and I run and I debug and maybe I run tests and I refactor and I navigate and all those things in the editor and IDE. Those things I do a lot. We want those to be as fast as possible. And so to do that, we're going to have to build some features into both the runtime and the tooling system in order to facilitate kind of some smoke and mirrors, so that when you're coding, we can just not have to pay a lot of that cost over and over and over again. So I think we will. The intent is to get us back to that type of performance. Whether it will be through the same mechanism is unlikely. I think it'll be more through the mechanisms that we use today in Visual Studio for full framework applications, like the persistent VBCS compiler that the Roslyn team has, which is an out-of-proc sort of background compiler that sits there and caches a bunch of information, so that when your app, the actual compiler, starts up, it can go, well, I need all this information because this thing already got it. I don't have to recompute it. It saves a lot of time. And all the way through to if you're running. If we have to restart your application when you make a code change, how do we get that application to start as quickly as possible? Well, the actual booting of the CLR only takes less than 100 milliseconds usually. It's all the loading of the references and specifically things like JITting and loading of things like Roslyn in order to do compilation in that process is what takes a lot of time. So if we can avoid those things during development and sort of do what we did in DNX, which is like we have a persistent process that's separate, and when the application process starts up, we boot it up in a special mode that says, hey, if you need assemblies, go over here to this process over this socket. Like we pass in a port literally of a development server, and we say, go and get your binaries over here because we're going to compile them over here much faster than you can. There's tricks like that we can do. So,
wow. Okay, question from Travis. So he said ASP.NET Core 2.0 Kestrel was upgraded with Edge server readiness, timeouts, limits, etc. Is it still recommended to run between IIS, Nginx, or Apache for security?
Yeah, that's still our default recommendation, is that as with any sort of public-facing HTTP server, you probably want to put that behind a well-hardened generic layer that has all the protections and is up to date for those things. Now, that said, we did add, like I said, timeouts and limits in Kestrel 2.0 specifically so that you could still be supported. Like we just simply didn't have those protections available at all in versions prior to 2.0. So there was literally no way you could run Kestrel on the public internet and be safe. And so now you can be safer. And if you do it, we will support you as long as you're using the default limits that we put in place or better. But we still recommend that you're always better off putting your traffic behind a well-configured, hardened edge server, which most things are. But there are special cases where you don't want to do that, and you have to understand the risks in doing so. But we've made some improvements to that. So I can't remember the actual wording of what the document says. Like the document's been worded in a specific way so that Barry's happy.
Exactly.
But essentially, you won't not be supported now.
Right.
But we'd still recommend that you do it. If all other things being equal, we recommend you do it. That said, on that note, in 2.1, one of the things that we're currently working on is a change or an improvement or an additional mode for the ASP.NET Core module, which we refer to as ANCM. This is the module in IIS that hosts ASP.NET Core applications because they're out of proc, right? They run .NET XE. So we have a version of that now, or an enhancement to ANCM coming for 2.1 that can host in proc. Similar to what you used to have with ASP.NET, so that you would have your W3WP process that is owned by IIS, and then inside that process, the .NET Core CLR has been launched, like directly using the .NET hosting APIs. And we went away from this back in beta 8 simply because the APIs, this was back in the DNX days still, we hadn't moved to .NET. And so there was no generic host API for the CLR at that point. We owned it, we were the host, and we had a different host for the in-proc model versus the out-of-proc model, and we didn't want to maintain two hosts. And then there was a Windows hosting model separate again. So maintaining a CLR host is actually a lot of work. And if you get anything different between them, you can get behavior differences, which is obviously really, really bad. And so we wanted to ensure that we just have a single host for us to maintain. Now that the .NET XE hosting layer is factored out, so the .NET XE itself is very thin, and the actual hosting logic is in a separate DLL, which is versioned along with the CLR. We can just load that hosting DLL directly from ANCM and then have it boot the CLR for us with the exact same behaviors as the .NET executable. And so that's what we've done. Now, the advantages of that are you can now host in proc in IIS, which means you lose the latency hop.
Oh,
so you
wow.
don't have to wait for the process to start up and then use the Windows HTTP stack to proxy all the requests over. In our early testing right now, that has yielded throughput gains on a specific server, an Azure VM that we've been using to test this, from about, I think it was like 12,000. The numbers are in one of the issues somewhere. It's in the teens thousands for the current model to in the 50, 60,000 throughput for the new model. So you would basically get all the performance back that we had lost by hosting ASP.NET Core behind IIS in a separate process. By moving it back in process, we can practically get, in real world terms, most of the performance back and just be limited by IIS. Now, if you run Kestrel directly, you still get a lot more performance. But we're looking at like 4 to 5 times better throughput and lower latency than the current hosting model behind IIS using this new model. And then I think if you go to Kestrel direct, you can get another 4 or 5 times on top of that because of all the things we do in Kestrel. For the benchmarks specifically, not for like real apps, obviously, but for benchmarks. So.
Do you know if there's a so there's the core module, or there's a module support in IIS? Is there anything like that with Nginx or Apache where you can do
absolutely.
like
Ngx obviously has modules. That's how you plug in, whatever they call them, but you can plug in handlers and modules, whatever they call them, so you can do stuff. You can host stuff inside in proc in Nginx, or you can have it shell out and like proxy doing that way as well. So it's a very similar model, is my understanding.
So
obviously Apache too.
So
is the question, could we host in proc in Nginx?
Yes.
I believe the answer is yes, but when we looked at that, it's quite rare. I'm not aware of any sort of mainstream, very popular application frameworks that we're kind of, an analog to, like Node or those type of things, who have a module like that people regularly use. And so for whatever reason, the Nginx reverse proxy hosting on Linux is much, much, much faster. There's much lower latency than what we've been experienced with the way that we did it in the ASP.NET Core module. Doesn't mean we can't make it better. We just haven't been able to put the time into making it better so far. But we're seeing this as a real opportunity to sort of close that gap down for the default hosting model. This would be an option, obviously, in the 2.1 timeframe, because we can't just change it in a minor release. It's probably has side effects, but it would be an option. You'd be able to opt into this approach, which for certain apps would be good. It does come with some caveats, like there's limits on how many CLRs you can load into an app pool. Basically, it's one. So if you take this approach, your app pool that you assign to this application can only host your application. Like, it can't even host 2 applications using the same CLR because there's no isolation model in .NET Core. There's no app domain. And
right.
You would have to, if you want isolation in a single app pool, you would still need to do the out-of-proc hosting model, because then you have the process boundary for each application. But if you don't need that, you just want an app pool per application, which is perfectly reasonable for some cases, then you would be able to use this. And so anyway, this is in progress right now. Good things to look forward to.
Cool. Very important question. What happened to Damien's second watch?
It broke. So, it was an Android Wear Huawei watch. I updated it to Android Wear 2. Frankly, I thought Android Wear 2 was a step back from Android Wear 1, specifically around notifications, which is what I used it mostly for. And then the bigger thing was the vibration engine motor inside it just got incredibly weak. I don't know whether I dropped it or I don't know what happened, but when it doesn't vibrate, or discernibly, it becomes useless, because that's all I really used it for. So I'm currently waiting for the Huawei Band Pro 2, I think it's called. And if you haven't seen it, go and look at it. It's basically the Microsoft Band reincarnate. And so that's pretty much exactly the device I want, which is like a, the sort of the OLED wraparound screen, much thinner, much lighter. It's, I think it's waterproof too. You can swim with it, like it's a
that's
it's a proper one.
Yeah.
But it has all the alerts and sort of app capabilities of the band. I don't really need it to run Android Wear. I just want it to show me calls and emails and texts and stuff on here, and vibrate and give me step tracking and sleep tracking. So it's been announced, but it hasn't been released yet. So when that comes out, I'll buy one of those, and that'll very likely be my second watch.
Cool. All right, we have a question on localization. I work on a project with localization and put the resx files in a different assembly. Tried several things, but the only one working was renaming the assembly the same as the web one.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the...
Yeah, we'd need obviously a lot more detail to figure. I will say that the resource manager, which is so there's two layers of localization in ASP.NET Core. There's the localization abstractions that we provide in ASP.NET Core as a programming interface, right? The iString localizer. And then there are the implementations of those that actually give you the localization functionality, and they have to be backed by something. And the only one that we ship is the one that's backed by the Resource Manager API in .NET, okay? So the Resource Manager API is the kind of this symbiotic thing that relies on build time capabilities to embed resources inside assemblies, okay? Or compile resources into satellite assemblies, which are these assemblies that are named after a culture. So you have like myapplication.en-au.dll gives you the Australian English strings for the My Application DLL, okay? And then the Resource Manager API in .NET, by convention, you really can't configure it, will find that automatically, okay? And then, the assembly loading mechanism in .NET is all kind of basically hard-coded to do all that sort of stuff. If you want to use an alternate localization system, one that isn't Resource Manager, you can write your own. You can implement iString localizer yourself so that your application code is all the same. Every time you get a string, you'll use the same API, iView localizer or iString localizer, but the implementation is different. But as I said, we only ship one. So in doing so, when we shipped that one implementation, there is a couple of options that we provided for it. So you can change where we look for certain files, because to have the .NET runtime find the correct assembly that the resource that you've asked for is located in is all basically convention based. Like it's all, everything has to align perfectly, otherwise it doesn't load because it just doesn't find it. And it can be quite finicky. Like a lot of times people assume something will work and they type it that way, and there's no build time checking, there's no API checking of this because it's all late bound, it all gets loaded at runtime, and they just kind of scratch their heads going, why aren't you loading my assembly? So if you're trying to move resources from one assembly into another assembly and you're not adhering to the naming conventions that the Resource Manager API expects, and conversely that the build task that builds those assemblies so that the Resource Manager can load them expects, then it's just not going to work. So I actually don't, it sounds like they're trying to move the default resources out of the application assembly and into a separate assembly, which I guess would mean you would have to ensure that the separate assembly would have to be a satellite assembly using the culture name of the default culture of the application assembly, which you can set as an attribute of build time. Like you'd have to go and research all the sort of ancient .NET localization assembly stuff to figure that out. Log an issue on the ASP.NET localization repo with as many details as you can, and we'll see if we can help you.
Okay. Question on whether Visual Studio 2017 previews can be uninstalled. And the simplest way is just run the installer.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, just go to hit start, type installer, and the Visual Studio installer will come up in the results. Open that, find the preview, and if you've got both installed, there'll be one entry for the preview, one entry for the main version. Click on modify, I think it is, on the preview, and then drop down from there and choose uninstall, and it'll uninstall the preview. So
cool. Let me see. My scroll bar keeps going away in the questions, which is fun. Anything else jump out at you that's...
I'm just doing a quick... So a question from Michael. Question, ASP.NET Core is supported as an edge server. Is the missing SNI support on the roadmap for 2.1, multiple certs on one IP address? My understanding is it's not going to make it for 2.1, which I'm a little sad about. We had to prioritize some other networking stuff like ALPN in order to get support for HTTP2. That was considered a higher priority, but I agree SNI support is incredibly important, especially because one of the other things we're looking to do in 2.1 is defaulting to HTTPS on in our configured applications. People probably know that Chrome, I think from October this year, is going to start marking any website that accepts input in any text box as not secure if it is not being served over HTTPS. And so basically the industry is changing. You really have to assume that HTTPS is required on new applications. And so we're going to be doing the work in our templates and the APIs behind them in 2.1 to make, file new ASP.NET Core with HTTPS the default and easy, so that it basically self-configures as much as possible, which includes, doing development work in HTTPS and then going through to your staging and production environments in HTTPS as well. So that's actually quite a bit of work, because provisioning new certificates is something that we've kind of hidden from people a lot today for development purposes. IS Express, when you install it as an admin with Visual Studio, actually provisions SSL certs on your behalf and binds them to HTTP sys as an admin, so that you don't have to do it as a user, because you can't do it as a user in Windows. So there's a whole bunch of things we have to solve to make that usable. And then obviously when you're not on Windows, you're doing the command line, that's a whole other problem. Like you have to generate self-signed certs. And then the tool to do that is different on every platform generally. There isn't a .NET command to do that yet. So we have to solve that. So SNI is important if you're going to be doing edge servers and you want to use a single process to serve multiple sites with different host headers with multiple certificates terminating each one in proc. And we don't have that in .NET Core just yet. But I believe it's on the roadmap. It's just not 2.1 at the moment. So
cool. There's a little more clarification on the Fusion Passenger thing. So it says that it's what allows commodity LAMP hosting providers to support Python, Ruby on Rails, Node.js on a standard Apache, CentOS, Ubuntu type hosting provider. So the idea is that it makes it easier for kind of $12 a month or whatever, tick stuff off. The only thing that comes to mind for me on this is you can run Azure Stack. There's that ability. You can run a lot of this stuff locally. I don't know though of anyone that's built kind of a meta level over, like a hosting level over.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, like traditional ASP.NET hosters obviously just use IIS.
Yeah.
And you install Windows or the Windows Web Server Edition with IIS, and then you configure it, and that's your hosting. And then there was a couple of third-party sort of white box offerings for shared hosting based on IIS that a lot of hosting companies used. And as you said, Azure Stack is the one that Microsoft provides to hosters or to people running on-prem if they want to use Azure. Basically, they want to run Azure App Service themselves. You can do that. But I'm not aware of anything similar. Now, if this is something that's already been applied on Linux to PHP and Node and those type of things and Ruby on Rails, I can't see why it wouldn't work for ASP.NET Core if someone wanted to extend it to that. But this is the first I've heard about it. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then, of course, there's also like Docker style.
Of course, which makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah, cool. So. I think that's about all the questions. I don't see.
There's a couple other little ones. Can identity as a service be used in Core 2?
Right.
We can ship the STS stuff in Core 2. We pulled it out. It is on the roadmap for 2.1. And so the current plan is that it will likely ship in 2.1, but there's still a lot of stuff we have to solve to make that a shippable experience. And so we're working through that right now. Why Razor Pages is not another name. It makes a lot of confusion on Google. We actually had a naming issue. I raised a naming issue nearly a year ago, and we talked through a whole bunch of names with the community, and this was the best we could come up with. I mean, it's not a brand, and I know at the time the Google foo actually was pretty good. Like searching for Razor Pages didn't really yield results that we felt we wouldn't be able to get above very quickly. And I think that's already the case. If you search for ASP.NET Core Razor Pages, you're going to hit our stuff and like the community stuff that talks about it. But unfortunately, when we're using generic names like pages and controllers and views and databases, there's really not an awful lot you can do, unfortunately. And even the term MVC, I agree. It'd be nice if we could just make up names, but we're just not allowed to. So very often.
There was there's one other Razor Pages. Somebody says, when I need to get data on the database on the get, and I validate the page, the return page does not return this database data back. So I guess it's looking at post redirect, or I'm not sure exactly.
Not sure exactly what they're asking. Where's the question?
After, let me see. I don't have timestamps on.
Okay.
It's a little ways back.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see that one. I see the localization one, I see edge server. Oh, when I need to get some data on the database on the get and I validate the page, the return page does not return this database data back. Why? So they might be asking, if you're doing a get request and you've marked a property as bindable in Razor Pages, so you mark it with the bind property attribute, right? We do not bind properties on get requests, even if you mark them with bind property by default. You have to specifically tell it that it supports get binding. So when you use the bind property attribute in a Razor page, there is an overload of the constructor for that attribute that you can set the support to get property. You set that to true, and then we will bind incoming data on a get request. So if there's a body on the get request, or route values, or query string values, then we will use those to bind and build an object for you. We do not do it on get request by default because it's just not the common case. And so for security reasons, we tend to be very explicit. We require the developer to be very explicit about when they want data bound from the incoming request onto objects that are going to be used inside your C# code, obviously, because it's quite, you have to be very careful about whether you're basically trusting user input and stamping it onto objects. And so by default, first of all, you have to mark it as bind property, or you have to accept it as a parameter to your page handler. That's when we will do it. And then secondly, we only do it on post. If you do those things, you have to mark it as supporting get if you want to do that. Okay. So I'm assuming that's what it means. It is, I mean, there are some cases where you'd want to do that. It's unusual. Obviously, it's not the normal case where you would bind data on a get. Generally, that's only things like search pages and stuff like that, where you mark your form as method equals get instead of method equals post. But anyway, that's how you do it.
Cool.
Hope that answers the question.
I think that's about all the questions.
I think you might be right.
All right.
Oh, but look, we kept 220 people watching still.
Wow.
So I am going to surmise that without Hanselman, we were more successful and our retention rate was even better. And we started on time.
We started on time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, every time Hanselman's not here, we happen to start on time. It's amazing.
So
right.
now we have to get a hold of, I guess we just do dramatic zoom out.
We did the dramatic zoom out, then he said text him and then he'll end the call. So
maybe just do a dramatic zoom out and walk out of the room.
Right, so I have my button now. So I'll do my dramatic zoom out and then I'll hang up on my side. So I'll be gone. It will be dramatic. Okay, you ready? Engaging. You're going to have to do the jingle.
Okay.
Ready, set, and... Or you can't do the jingle because if you talk, then it won't.
Oh, shoot. You're going to have to sing it yourself.
Okay, hang on. Let me do it again. Let me push the zoom in button. There we go. I love this new camera. Ready? Let's do it again. Dramatic zoom out. It's so dramatic.